Hi girls, it's Miss Gaska. Today I'm going to go over English 1, Semester 2, Week 2, Activity 1.15, Using Rhetorical Appeals. Our learning targets for this activity are to identify and analyze the effectiveness of the use of logos, ethos, and pathos in texts, and to explain how a writer or speaker uses rhetoric to advance his or her purpose. Now, I think this lesson is particularly useful not only because it's going to help you on your exam and in future English classes, but also so you can identify when somebody is trying to persuade you to their side and what techniques that they're using to try to manipulate you in that way. So let's look over the elements of rhetoric. Rhetoric is the use of words to persuade in writing or speech. Aristotle defined rhetoric as the ability in each particular case to see the available means of persuasion. He described three main types of rhetoric, and I really want you to pay attention to these: logos, ethos, and pathos. Authors and speakers use rhetorical appeals in their arguments to persuade the intended audience that their claims are right. So regardless of whether the text is going to use rhetorical appeals or if it's just going to use rhetoric, it's referring to the same techniques, those techniques of logos, ethos, and pathos. So the rhetorical triangle. So together, these rhetorical appeals are central to understanding how writers and speakers appeal to their audiences and persuade them to accept their messages. It is helpful to think of them as 3 points of a triangle. So the first one is logos, text. What information, evidence, and logical reasoning are offered within the text? And I'll explain this a little bit more in a moment after I go over all three. Pathos, audience. What values, beliefs, and emotions are appealed to within the text? How does the text evoke the audience's feelings? And ethos, speaker. What perception of the speaker is created within the text? How does the text evoke the audience's trust? So, let's go a little bit more into details. One way I want you to think of the word logos is logic. Logos and logic both start with the same 3 letters, and this is how I'm going to try to help you remember it. Logos and logic. You see how they have the same 3 letters. So logos is referring to logic, not feelings, not emotions, just straight up facts. So by facts, I mean things like statistics, charts, graphs, things that show you that this is a fact that we need to accept. That's logos. It's when it's saying, this is all of the evidence, this is all the statistics and numbers to prove and support my argument. So then let's look at pathos. Pathos is trying to evoke an emotional response within the audience, and oftentimes it's used to make the speaker seem a little bit more relatable from an emotional level. So pathos means feelings, but here's the thing. I want you, I don't have a simple way to remember it like logos and logic, but here's a way of my way of explaining it. Think about a psychopath. So a psychopath ends with path, just like pathos begins with path. Path means feelings. So a psychopath has feelings that are unlike a normal person's. They don't experience emotions at the same range or wavelengths that a non-psychopathic human does. So I want you to think of that. When you think of path, it's talking about feelings, like how psychopaths don't experience feelings the same way normal people do. Or neurotypical people, I'm sorry. So ethos or speaker. So this is where the speaker is trying to convince you that they're somebody worth trusting or believing. And they can do that in a variety of ways. So you're trying to think of the speaker as an entity that's trying to gain your trust by making themselves seem appealing to you in some way. And one of the ways that they do this is by bringing in experts to support their opinion. So the speaker will often bring in people who know more about the topic than they do as their quotes, and that's an example of them trying to show you that you should trust them because these experts agree with them, okay? So for ethos, I kind of relate that to experts. So I say, ethos and experts because they start with the same letter. But you can also think of it as ethics, as in the author wants you to think that you have the same ethical, the same code of ethics that they do so that you can trust them. So think of it in those two types of ways. So ethos, ethics, or expert, which, you know. Anyway, let's keep going. Please study those three, by the way, because they're going to pop up again and again and again as you go through your different English levels. They're also going to definitely appear on your final exam whenever it is that you do take that, and so you need to know these three things. And even for regular life, you need to know them because it's important to be able to tell when somebody is appealing to your rhetorical ethos, pathos, and logos, because you can decide if you actually support this or if you support it because they are convincing you through these three rhetorical appeals. So, to preview this next activity, we're going to read a speech and analyze the use of rhetorical appeals. So setting a purpose for reading. As I always say, this is the most important part of the instructions that they give us because it tells us how we're going to be annotating the text. So it says, as you read the text, underline any examples of logos, ethos, or pathos. Well, I'm going to give you slightly different instructions here, okay? What I want you to do is instead of underlining, I want you to assign a different color, if possible, if the program that you're using allows, a different color for each of these three devices. And then when you see that device being used within the text, I want you to highlight it with the same color. Like I said, you may not be able to do this depending on what program you're using. If you're using Foxit, then yes, you can. But if you're using one of the other programs I recommended, I don't know if they have this capability. So you'll have to explore it for yourself and see if that works for you. If not, you can continue to underline, just like the instructions originally say. But I'm going to demonstrate it using highlighting. So also, it wants you to circle unknown words and phrases, trying to determine what they mean by using context clues, word parts, or a dictionary. So, this speech is called America's School Children by President Barack Obama. Now, it's a little bit long, so I'm also going to be uploading the link, or I'm going to be posting the link to the speech when Barack Obama gave this speech so that you can listen along while you read in order to facilitate better understanding of what he's talking about. So let's start off. I'm going to read the first 3 paragraphs with you and show you how I would annotate it. After that, it's up to you to read the remainder of the speech and continue to annotate before meeting me at the bottom for how to answer the questions. So paragraph 1. I know that for many of you, today is the first day of school. And for those of you in kindergarten or starting middle or high school, it's your first day in a new school, so it's understandable if you're a little nervous. I imagine there are some seniors out there who are feeling pretty good right now with just one more year to go. And no matter what grade you're in, some of you are probably wishing it were still summer and you could have stayed in bed just a little bit longer this morning. So I'm going to pause there and show you how I would annotate that text. So I think he's appealing to our sense of pathos here, which I assigned yellow. So I think the reason I think this is because he's describing the first day of school, which is something that everybody has experienced at some point or other, unless they are too young to have gone to school or if they live in an area where it's not required for children to go to school. But for us here in America, we've all experienced first day of school if we're at least 6 years old. So he's trying to make this seem relatable to you, something that you've been through so that you can easily put yourself in the situation that he's going to be talking about. So he's talking about feelings here when he says, it's understandable if you're a little nervous. He's using sympathy to say to you, I understand if you're nervous. Everybody's nervous, like you should feel like I care about your feelings. I imagine there are some seniors who are feeling pretty good. He's talking about feelings again here, like showing that he's been there and he understands your feelings. And then, no matter what grade you're in, probably wishing it were still summer. and that you could have stayed in bed a little longer. So he's showing you that he understands what you're feeling regarding the first day of school. So all of this revolves around feelings, and so it goes with pathos. And I'm just going to jot a quick note in the side. He is using pathos to demonstrate that he understands the feelings of his listeners, and to make himself seem more relatable to his listeners. So when a speaker makes themselves seem relatable to a listener, their goal is for you to already feel like they're a friend of yours, so you're more likely to agree with what they have to say. Okay? So keep that in mind as we continue to read. I know that feeling. See, that's what I was just saying. When I was young, my family lived overseas. I lived in Indonesia for a few years. And my mother, she didn't have the money to send me where all the American kids went to school, but she thought it was important for me to keep up with an American education. So she decided to teach me extra lessons herself Monday through Friday. But because she had to go to work, the only time she could do it was at 4:30 in the morning. So here he's also using pathos. And let's see where. So first of all, he says, I know that feeling. Actually, that might actually be an example of ethos because he's trying to establish a sense of you trusting him. The color I gave ethos was pink. He wants to create himself as this character that you can trust because he relates to what you've been through. So I lived in Indonesia. Here he's talking about how his mom didn't have the money, which might cause some audience members to feel a bit of sympathy. Which would be, again, back to pathos. And then we have that his mom decided to teach extra lessons herself, which is going to give us this feeling that he had, you know, a really positive role model in his mom who really cared about him. And that kind of makes us feel like warm and fuzzy to hear about a mom who really takes care of her kid really well. But she had to go to work, so they had to do it at 4:30 in the morning, which you can kind of imagine here his feelings like, oh, I can't believe I have to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. Like, we all hate waking up early in order to do something that is not even our regular schoolwork, but extra on top of our schoolwork. So he's showing that he understands how you're feeling. He uses ethos in I know that feeling to establish himself as a trustworthy person who can relate to the audience. He also uses pathos to show, to appeal to his audience's feelings regarding his loving mother, their lack of money, and how early he had to get up in the morning. So all of these things were designed to make the audience feel, except for the first part, which is to make the audience trust him. So now let's do the third paragraph, and after that I'm going to set you free to do the remainder of these annotations without me. Now, as you might imagine, I wasn't too happy about getting up that early, and a lot of times I'd fall asleep right there at the kitchen table. But whenever I'd complain, my mother would just give me one of those looks and she'd say, "This is no picnic for me either, Buster." So here he's also appealing to our feelings because he says, as you might imagine, I wasn't too happy, meaning like you'll be able to imagine how unhappy he would be getting up that early because you've experienced it. He said, I'd fall asleep right there at the kitchen table, which is kind of funny in an image. And it also, at the same time, makes him a little bit relatable because we can imagine falling asleep at the table if it was that early. But then, when he would complain, his mother would give me one of those looks. So here, he's once again making himself seem dependable. And I'm going to call that ethos because I think it's making him seem like a trustworthy character because he's so relatable. And then his mom says something that many of our moms have probably said at some point in various ways. This is no picnic for me either, Buster. So I'm going to write in my margin that he he appeals to the emotions of his audience, which, if you don't remember who his audience is, he's talking to America's school children. So he's talking to kids. He appeals to the emotions of his audience in regards to waking up early. He also is using ethos to show that he is relatable and has a mom who is not that different than our own moms might be. And even if your mom isn't like that, because of the way that we've seen moms portrayed in the media, we could definitely imagine this kind of mom. So, continue to read the speech. As I said, I'll be posting the link to Obama actually giving this speech so that you can listen to it while you read along. And continue to annotate it, please. If you can't do the highlighting, like I said, underlining is just fine. So continue to look for those 3 appeals: ethos, logos, and pathos. And please, please, please make sure you understand what each of those words means. So the speech is a little long, which is why I recommend listening to it at the same time. And then let's get down to the questions. So number 1 says, the president begins his speech with statements about the audience's feelings and then a story about his own childhood. Why does he begin his speech that way? Well, we've just talked about it. So think about what I've said regarding why he begins his speech that way. And then that'll be your answer. Then for number 2, it says, what is the main idea of this speech? So after you've read the whole speech, think about what it is that he's trying to tell the audience or convince the audience. That will be your main idea. Number 3 is, what rhetorical appeal out of logos, ethos, or pathos is used by the hypothetical situations in paragraph 9? And if you don't know what hypothetical means, you might want to look it up so that you know which situations they're referring to. And then describe which of those appeals is being used. I also want you to say why you think it's that appeal. For number 4, what type of appeal is most prominent in paragraphs 13 through 16? Why might the speaker choose to include his own personal story here? So you're going to be looking for which of those 3 appeals is the most prominent, meaning stands out the most, in paragraphs 13, 14, 15, and 16. And then explain why the speaker chose to include his own personal story at that point. For number 5, it says, in paragraph 17, what is the effect of the president's repeated use of the word maybe? So you're going to have to go to paragraph 17 and look at him saying maybe over and over and over again in order to figure out and explain what he's trying to do by using maybe so much. For number 6, it says, in paragraphs 18 through 24, what does the president do to overcome potential resistance by his audience? Does this approach rely more on logos or on pathos? Explain. So you're going to be looking at those paragraphs 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and explaining how the president overcomes whatever resistance his audience might give. So he's going to explain some kind of a resistance that his audience might be feeling, and then he's going to give some kind of explanation about how they could overcome that resistance. So you're going to be explaining after that, after you figure out what he's doing to overcome it, you're going to figure out if that approach is more like logos or more like pathos, and then why. Number 7 says, what's the purpose of the questions the president asks in paragraph 34? So look at paragraph 34 at the questions he asks, and then determine what the purpose he's going for is. So here it says, review the rhetorical appeals definitions at the beginning of the activity. Find one example of each appeal from Obama's speech and write the quote in the appropriate box of the rhetorical triangle below. So you're using one of each type of appeal from Obama's speech in order to complete this chart. Just one. Then, it says in your group, but you don't have a group, conduct a brief soapstone analysis of this speech. Be prepared to discuss your analysis with the class. You're not going to have to discuss your analysis, but you do still have to complete this chart. So, for a speaker, what does the reader know about the writer? So your analysis is like how you analyze what the speaker knows, what the reader knows about the writer. And then textual support, you explain what proves to you that you know that fact about the writer. So, for one, you know that he was president of the United States. You know that his mom got him up early. You know he spent part of his childhood in Indonesia. Things that you know about the speaker go in that analysis box. and then textual support would be direct quotes from the text to show those things. Occasion. What are the circumstances surrounding this text? So you might want to look at the subtitle at the beginning of the text to help understand that, and then as you go through the text, there will be bits and pieces here and there about why he's giving that speech, like what the purpose is, what the ceremony is, so that you can analyze that and use textual support to back it up. Audience, who is the target audience? Well, we know that the thing is called To the America's School Children, so the target audience is clearly America's school children. Go and find evidence to back that up. Purpose. Why did the author write this text? So what was he trying to do when he wrote it? What was his purpose for writing this? And then give evidence to support that. Subject. What is the topic? So what subject is being talked about here? You would write that in analysis and then give support in the other box. And then tone. What's the author's tone or attitude toward the subject? So what is Obama's attitude based on your analysis, and then what evidence you have that shows you what the analysis is. So now we're going to be also looking at the smell strategy to analyze how Obama uses the different rhetorical appeals to persuade his audience. Complete the graphic organizer and include specific quotes and textual evidence you noted while reading. So here are some of the things that Springboard wants you to know about the SMELL strategy. SMELL is an acronym for Sender, Message, Emotional Strategies, Logical Strategies, and Language. The strategy is useful for analyzing a persuasive speech or essay by asking 5 essential questions. 1. What is the sender-receiver relationship? Who are the images and language meant to attract? Describe the speaker or writer of the text. 2. What is the message? Summarize the thesis of the text. 3. What is the desired effect of the emotional strategies? 4. What logic is being used? How does it or its absence affect the message? Consider the logic of images as well as words. And then 5. What does the language of the text describe? How does it affect the meaning and effectiveness of the writing? Consider the language of images as well as words. So that's the SMELL strategy, and here's the chart. So sender-receiver relationship. So you're going to be looking for these questions that I just went over. Write it in that box below. Same thing for each of these different sections. They might add a few additional details. Just read through these questions and answer them to the best of your ability according to the text. So now, the next thing that we're going to look at after you finish that activity is the language and writer's craft parallel structure section. So in the past, you've learned that parallel structure consists of a series of words or phrases or clauses that are similar in grammatical form. So parallelism is a way writers use syntax or sentence structure to create powerful sentences for effect and to show that 2 or more ideas have the same level of importance. So keep that in mind when they ask, why does the writer use parallel structure in this place? It's possibly because of that. Parallelism enhances the rhetorical appeal of a writer or speaker and is frequently used in speeches. In the excerpt below, Obama's use of repetitive sentence structure tells us that all parties who hold responsibility in education hold equal responsibility. Example. Now, I've given a lot of speeches about education, and I've talked about responsibility a lot. I've talked about teachers' responsibility for inspiring students and pushing you to learn. I've talked about your parents' responsibility for making sure you stay on track and get your homework done, and don't spend every waking hour in front of the TV or with the Xbox. I've talked a lot about your government's responsibility for setting high standards and supporting teachers and principals, and talking around schools that aren't working, where students aren't getting the opportunities that they deserve. So he's using the sentence structure. I've talked about your blank responsibility multiple times to show that it has equal weight. So for this practice it says, read the passage below and underline the instances of parallel structure that have the most persuasive impact on the reader or listener. Explain and defend your choice. So in this paragraph, you're looking for examples where he's used a repetitive sentence structure or phrase in order to have some kind of an impact, and then explain what persuasive impact it has. But at the end of the day, we can have the most dedicated teachers, the most supportive parents, the best schools in the world, and none of it will have made a difference. None of it will matter unless all of you fulfill your responsibilities, unless you show up to those schools, unless you pay attention to those teachers, unless you listen to your parents and grandparents and other adults that have put in the hard work it takes to succeed. That's what I want to focus on today. The responsibility each of you has for your education. So look at what he's repeating there. Then check your understanding. How does Obama's use of parallel structure and rhetorical appeals persuade the audience? So what is he trying to do to persuade the audience with those parallel structure and rhetorical appeals? Then writing to sources, argument. Explain how Obama builds the argument in his speech. Identify his claim, supporting evidence, concession, and conclusion. In your writing, be sure to begin with a thesis that identifies the claim made by Obama and states how he supports that claim. Explain what reasons and supporting evidence Obama uses and why, and explain how the concession and conclusion support the claim. Include multiple direct quotations from the text to support your explanations. Introduce and punctuate all quotations correctly. So you could write this in one paragraph, you could write it in multiple paragraphs, whatever you want to do, but make sure that you hit all of these bullet points, alright? And that's it for 1.15. I will see you in the next activity for 1.16. If you have any questions about this assignment, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be glad to help you with anything that you need. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.